trying to keep up with the ins and outs of something like pharmaceutical regulation, it can feel like navigating a maze sometimes.
Oh, definitely. There's just so much information out there, isn't there?
Yeah. But today we're going to laser focus on something really important, something that directly affects the safety and quality of the medicines and, well, the medical devices we all rely on.
FDA warning letters.
Exactly. FDA warning letters.
That's right. And you should think of these letters as the FDA's way of saying, okay, hold on. We've spotted some serious issues here that need immediate attention.
So it's more than just a formal notice.
Much more. It often signals potential trouble, with how these vital products are being made or even marketed. And that has real implications for, well, everyone.
Right. Okay. And for this deep dive, we've got some pretty illuminating material. Excerpts from an FDA resource explaining these letters, plus some recent concrete examples, case studies.
Yeah, those case studies really bring it home.
They do. So our mission for you today, listening in, is to kind of demystify these letters. We want to understand why they're so significant, what kinds of violations they actually uncover, why we seem to be seeing maybe more of them lately, and what the broader impact is, not just for the companies, but, ultimately for all of us.
So the public relying on these products.
Exactly. So let's unpack this. What exactly is an FDA warning letter?
Well, to really get that, it helps to remember the FDA's, fundamental job. They're the guardians, basically, making sure pharmaceuticals, food, medical devices, that they're produced safely and effectively.
Okay. The protectors.
Pretty much. And warning letters are a key tool in their arsenal to do that. Yeah. They serve as these official notifications to companies when they've found failures to meet regulatory requirements.
So definitely not just a casual heads up, it's a formal alert. And these aren't usually about minor paperwork mistakes, are they? They're highlighting potentially serious stuff.
Precisely. These letters, they demand that the company take immediate steps to correct whatever issues were identified.
Yes, immediate steps.
And while the letter itself doesn't automatically come with a fine, failing to properly address the concerns, that can absolutely lead to significant consequences down the line. We're talking recalls, import restrictions, even legal action.
Okay, so it's much more than just ticking boxes on some compliance checklist. It sounds like these letters really get at a company's underlying commitment or maybe a lack of commitment to, keeping the public safe.
Absolutely. That's a great way to put it. And what's interesting to something you mentioned is the reported increase in the number of these letters being issued recently.
Yeah, I saw that. What's behind that?
Well, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It could actually mean the FDA is stepping up its oversight, being more proactive and monitoring the industry.
So more vigilance maybe?
Possibly. The sheer increase suggests maybe a shift, from just reacting to problems to trying to catch them earlier. It might signal a period of, let's say, greater scrutiny for the whole industry.
That makes sense. So for the companies getting these letters, really understanding what they mean isn't just about staying out of trouble.
Yeah.
It's about protecting their reputation, their business, really,
Yes.
their long-term survival, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. By looking closely at these letters, looking at the case studies of companies who've got them, and understanding the common violations, well, pharma organizations can get valuable insights into where things can go wrong and why having really robust quality management systems is just absolutely essential.
Okay, so let's dig a bit deeper then. What are these letters actually about? What's the main purpose, and what kind of information do they usually pack in?
So like we touched on, the main point is to formally tell a business, hey, we found significant failures to meet regulations, usually discovered during inspections or maybe investigations. And the FDA's goal here, initially at least, is to encourage the companies to voluntarily fix the problems.
Voluntarily.
They're basically saying, look, here's what we found. You need to fix it, and you need to do it promptly.
And what sort of problems are we typically talking about? The source material mentioned a few general categories.
Yeah, there are definitely recurring themes. A really big one is manufacturing process flaws.
Okay, like what?
This could be anything from, say, inadequate sterilization procedures, which is obviously critical, could lead to contamination.
Definitely.
Or just a general failure to follow what we call good manufacturing practices, or GMP.
GMP, heard that acronym a lot.
You will. And these kinds of flaws, they can directly mess with how effective and safe a product actually is. GMP isn't just a checklist, It's meant to be a whole approach to building quality in every step of the way.
That sounds really fundamental. I mean, if the way it's made isn't right,
Yeah.
you can't really trust the final pill or device, can you?
Not at all. Which leads to another critical category, product quality failures.
Okay.
This is when the finished products themselves just don't meet the accepted standards. Maybe they don't have the right strength, maybe they have impurities. Essentially, they're substandard
Yeah.
and potentially harmful.
That's obviously a massive concern for anyone taking these things. What else gets the FDA writing these letters?
Label inaccuracies, that's another big one.
Mislabeling.
Yeah. Mislabeling can cause all sorts of chaos. Patients using it wrong, taking the wrong dose, maybe even completely misidentifying what the medicine is. It's a direct risk to health.
Makes total sense. You absolutely need to know what you're taking and how. And the last category I mentioned was unethical marketing strategies. What's that about?
So this usually involves things like promoting drugs for uses the FDA hasn't actually approved. That's called off-label promotion.
Ah, okay.
Or making claims about a product that just aren't backed up by solid scientific evidence. These kinds of things can mislead patients, sure, but also doctors and other healthcare professionals.
So the FDA isn't just watching how things are made, but also how they're being sold and talked about.
Exactly. So once they find these violations, the FDA issues the warning letter. It details the specific issues, explains why they're problems,
Right.
and importantly, it gives the company a chance to voluntarily fix things before the FDA has to take, more forceful action.
And there's a time frame.
Usually, yeah.
Yeah.
Typically around 15 business days to respond with a solid plan outlining how they're going to correct everything.
Okay, so the ball's in their court then. They need to take it seriously and act. But what if they don't? What if the response isn't good enough? The source mentioned consequences for non-compliance.
That's when things can really escalate. While the warning letter itself isn't like a fine or a penalty, failing to adequately sort out the violations, that can trigger pretty substantial enforcement actions. Things like fines, which can get quite large, especially if it's happened before.
Okay, financial penalties. What else?
The FDA can also order product seizures, meaning they can actually confiscate products that are deemed unsafe or, not compliant.
Wow, that would hit a company hard, operationally and financially. Any other steps?
They can go to court to seek injunctions. These are basically court orders telling a company to stop certain activities until they can prove they're back in compliance.
So stopping production or distribution?
Could be, yeah. And in the really serious cases, like if there's evidence of fraud or just deliberate negligence,
Yeah.
well, there can even be criminal prosecution.
Wow. Okay, so the stakes can get incredibly high. Now, the source also mentioned the legal side of things, specific sections of the FD&C Act. Can you break that down a bit?
Sure. Warning letters often point to specific legal sections that were violated, and which section they cite usually tells you something about how serious they think the problem is.
Okay.
For example, the source mentions Section 501A2 of the FD&C Act. This section says a product is considered adulterated if the way it was manufactured, packed, or held doesn't meet current good manufacturing practices, CGMP.
Adulterated. That sounds bad.
It is. So when the FDA uses that term under this section, it essentially means the process was flawed. It didn't meet basic quality standards, which could make the product less effective or even harmful to, you, the patient.
So seeing that section cited, that's a clear sign of serious problems with how the product's made, impacting safety directly.
Exactly. The source also brought up Section 801A3. A warning citing this means the FDA has refused to allow imports of products made in facilities that don't meet those CGMP standards.
Ah, so stopping things at the border, basically.
Precisely. Think of it like the FDA putting up a do not enter sign for medicines made in factories that aren't up to snuff on safety. It's a really powerful tool, especially with global manufacturing. It prevents non-compliant products from even getting into the U.S. market.
That sounds like a major barrier for manufacturers, especially overseas ones. Really forces them to focus on quality control, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Not complying here can lead to recalls, those import refusals we mentioned, and like the source says, potential legal trouble for not sticking to industry standards.
Okay. Now, let's talk about recent trends. The source pointed out a pretty significant jump in FDA enforcement, especially with these warning letters going to pharma companies.
Yeah, the numbers are quite striking, actually. The rate of warning letters issued per 100 inspections, it jumped 43% between 2019 and 2023. Went from about 2.98 up to 4.27.
43%, that's a big leap. What's driving that, do we know?
Well, this source suggests a couple of key things. One is a greater emphasis on data integrity.
Data integrity again?
The FDA is paying much closer attention to whether the data companies generate is accurate and reliable, especially in critical areas like lab testing. So that's led to more warning letters specifically about data integrity violations.
And that seems absolutely crucial, right, if the data's shaky.
Exactly.
You can't trust anything about the product's quality or safety.
Couldn't have said it better. The other big factor is the globalization of manufacturing. More and more drug production happens outside the U.S. these days.
Right, lots of offshore plants.
Yep. And as a result, the FDA has increased its oversight of those facilities. The percentage of warning letters going to overseas manufacturers actually went up from around 23% in 2019 to 33% in 2020.
So a definite focus on ensuring global compliance matches U.S. standards.
Clearly, it shows a growing focus there.
So this overall rise in warning letters, it really seems to highlight the FDA's push to be more proactive, ensuring compliance, protecting public health, especially now with manufacturing spread all over the globe.
Precisely. And for the pharma companies themselves, this trend just reinforces how critical solid regulatory compliance is.
Yeah.
If you fail to meet these standards, well, you risk major disruptions, big financial hits, and lasting damage to your reputation.
Sounds like companies really need to stay sharp. The source briefly mentions some proactive things they can do to stay compliant. What should they be focusing on?
Yeah, and these are really the fundamentals of a good compliance strategy. Companies need to focus on strengthening their quality management systems, the overall framework for ensuring quality.
Okay.
They also have to refine their data integrity procedures to make absolutely sure all their records are accurate, reliable, trustworthy.
Data integrity again. It keeps coming up.
It does. And finally, conducting periodic internal audits is just crucial. It helps them proactively find and fix potential compliance issues before the FDA shows up at the door.
Those sound like sensible measures, but I guess the trick is actually doing them consistently and effectively.
That's always the challenge, isn't it? Implementation.
Right. Now, the source also talked about learning from real-world examples, looking at case studies. Can you walk us through some of those? They seem really useful.
Absolutely. Looking at these real cases gives us a much clearer picture of the kinds of mistakes that lead to warning letters. And it hammers home why having those robust quality systems is just so vital. The source summarized 4 recent ones. These examples make it much more real for you listening. Shows the actual consequences.
Okay, let's start with Intus Pharmaceuticals. What happened there?
So, July 2023, their facility in Gujarat, India, got a warning letter. Serious CGMP violations. The FDA inspection found several major problems, including clear evidence of data manipulation.
Manipulation? How?
Visual inspectors were caught basically changing particle and defect counts to make sure batches look like they met the quality limits.
Wow. That's deliberately falsifying records.
It's a very serious breach of data integrity, yes.
What else did they find?
There were also issues with inadequate quality oversight. The FDA basically said the Quality Assurance Department didn't have the power or the resources it needed to actually ensure compliance. It led to systemic failures.
So the quality team was toothless.
Effectively, yeah. And on top of that, they saw poor laboratory practices. Things like incomplete records, environmental monitoring results not documented properly. It just undermined any confidence in their quality testing.
So a whole mess of connected problems there, all pointing back to weak quality control. What about Viatris, formerly Mylan? They got a letter too.
Yes, December 2024, their plant in Pithampur, India. Another warning letter after an inspection found significant CGMP deviations, a key issue again. Data integrity problems.
What kind this time?
Specifically, they found instances where test procedures and results were signed off, basically authored by analysts who hadn't actually done the analysis.
Wait, someone else did the work, but another person signed off as if they did.
That's what it looked like. Again, raises huge questions about the reliability of their data.
Another massive red flag on data integrity. Were there other issues at Viatris?
Yeah, the FDA also cited inadequate quality systems, said their quality unit wasn't exercising proper authority or fulfilling its duties, which led to poor handling of manufacturing variations.
And there were consequences.
Big ones. The FDA put import restrictions on 11 products made at that plant, a direct hit to their U.S. market access.
Ouch. Okay, direct impact on business. Let's move to Killich Healthcare India Limited. What was their story?
Killich Healthcare got a warning letter in March 2024, inspection of their Navi Mumbai facility. This one highlighted some really concerning issues with basic hygiene and quality control.
Like what?
They found insanitary conditions, actual debris near HEPA, filters in supposedly clean areas, problems with personnel hygiene employees seen barefoot in gowning-free zones, and issues with equipment, cleanliness, visibly contaminated equipment being used for sterile filling operations.
Barefoot in a sterile manufacturing area, that sounds incredibly basic, especially for sterile eye drops or something.
Exactly. Very fundamental failures. The FDA also pointed to an ineffective quality system there too, said the quality unit didn't have the resources or authority needed.
Seems like a pattern.
It does. And this was underlined by a delayed recall of sterile ophthalmic drugs. Even after the FDA recommended they recall products due to contamination fears, the company took nearly 3 weeks to actually start the recall.
3 weeks for potentially contaminated eye drops. That delay seems really troubling. Patient safety should be paramount there.
Absolutely. Highlights a lack of urgency where it's needed most.
Okay. And the last case study, Velocity Pharma LLC. What went wrong with them?
So Velocity Pharma, they're different. They're a distributor. They handle ophthalmic drugs made by contract manufacturers, CMOs, like Killich, actually. They got a warning letter in July 2024 after an inspection of their New York facility.
So not the manufacturer, but the distributor. What were their issues?
The FDA found problems with how they oversaw their suppliers, specifically inadequate qualification of suppliers. They didn't have proper procedures to make sure the drugs their CMOs were making were actually good quality.
Ah, so even if you don't make it yourself, you're still responsible for checking your suppliers.
Absolutely. You can't just assume everything's fine. You need systems to verify.
Makes sense. What else?
They also had deficient distribution records, missing critical info like addresses, batch numbers, quantities shipped, just incomplete tracking.
Okay.
And, similar to Killich, they got dinged for delayed recall actions. Even after they were told about the violations at their CMO's facility, they were slow pulling the affected products they'd already distributed.
Okay, so across these examples, wow. It really seems like we're seeing common threads, don't we? Data integrity issues popping up again and again.
Definitely.
Weaknesses in the overall quality systems. And sometimes just a failure to act quickly when problems are found.
That's a very good summary. The source material actually pulls these together, highlighting the most frequent offenses leading to warning letters. And yes, data integrity problems are consistently right near the top.
Still surprises me how often that comes up.
It includes errors, discrepancies in records, especially in critical stuff like microbiology, environmental monitoring data. As the source noted, a 2022 review found documentation issues, mostly data integrity, were behind 21% of warning letters to pharma companies.
21%. That really drives home how crucial, accurate, trustworthy record keeping is. You just can't fudge the numbers.
No, you can't. Another common issue, quality system deficiencies.
The overall system being weak.
Exactly. Weak management systems mean there's a fundamental need for stronger oversight, ensuring companies meet standards consistently. Interestingly, the source mentioned that between 2014 and 2016, quality system issues were the most frequent repeated violation.
Repeated.
Yeah, accounting for 34% of citations. Suggests it's a tough challenge for some companies, not just to set up good systems, but to keep them running effectively over time.
So it's not just having a quality manual on a shelf somewhere. It has to be alive, active, consistently followed.
Precisely. And the third common offense mentioned was process validation failures. What's that about? Process validation is basically the proof. Documented evidence that your specific manufacturing process will consistently churn out a product meeting all its specs and quality standards, time after time.
So proving the process itself works reliably.
Right. The fact that failures here keep getting cited shows there's an ongoing need for really solid validation. You need to guarantee stable product quality, batch after batch, minimize variations. In 2022, these validation issues made up 26% of CGMP deviations in warning letters.
So testing the final product isn't enough. You need proof the whole cooking process, essentially, is reliable.
You got it.
Okay, so we've talked about what leads to these letters, but let's circle back to the bigger consequences for the companies. We mentioned fines, seizures, but what's the wider fallout?
Oh, the repercussions can spread pretty wide. Beyond the immediate hit of fines or seized products, companies can face major operational disruptions. Think manufacturing shutdowns, maybe temporary, maybe longer, needed to fix everything.
And those shutdowns.
Yeah, those shutdowns can, unfortunately, sometimes lead to drug shortages, which directly impacts patients who need those specific medications.
That's a really sobering thought. These regulatory issues can have very direct, real-world consequences for people needing treatment.
It's true. It really connects the dots back to the public.
And what about the longer-term financial picture for these companies?
Well, the cost of just investigating and fixing the problems can be huge. Plus, getting a warning letter can seriously tarnish a company's reputation among doctors, patients, investors, everyone.
Loss of trust.
Exactly, which can lead to lost market share, investors getting nervous, hitting their long-term financial health.
It really sounds like getting a warning letter can be a major turning point for a company, and usually not for the better.
It absolutely can be. And it often leads to increased regulatory scrutiny down the road, too. Companies with a warning letter history often find themselves under a much closer watch from regulators. More frequent inspections, maybe more rigorous ones.
Okay, so to kind of wrap up this deep dive, it seems abundantly clear that FDA warning letters are a truly critical tool. They're safeguarding the quality and safety of the healthcare products we all count on.
hmm They're not just pointing out problems, are they? They're pushing companies to actually take corrective action.
Right. And as we saw with those case studies in CETAs, Viatris, Killage, Velocity Pharma, really fundamental things like bad data, weak quality controls, even just basic sanitation failures, they can all trigger serious regulatory action.
They really highlight the stakes involved.
And ultimately, these letters just underscore how vital it is for pharmaceutical companies to be proactive about compliance. It's about building a culture of quality, ensuring data integrity, having strong internal checks.
It's about mitigating risks, yeah.
Mm.
Ensuring product integrity, protecting their reputation in what is, let's face it, a very highly regulated world.
It seems like it needs to be baked in from the start, not just a reaction when things go wrong.
Exactly right. Embedding quality into every single part of the operation.
So for you, the listener, we really hope this deep dive has given you a clearer picture of what FDA warning letters are all about and why they matter so much for the safety and effectiveness of the medicines and devices you, your family, everyone depends on.
Yeah, while they might seem like internal industry stuff, kind of technical,
Mhm.
they have a very direct line to all of us. They're not just bureaucratic paper. They're a key sign of the health or potential problems in that pharmaceutical supply chain we all rely on.
Well said. And that brings us to our final thought for you today. Thinking about this rise in warning letters and just how complex global drug manufacturing is now,
Hmm.
what role do you think consumers and patients actually have, in staying informed and maybe even advocating for the highest possible standards of quality and safety in our medicines?
That's a really interesting question to ponder.
It is definitely something to think about and maybe even explore further. A lot of this FDA information is actually publicly available if you.
Thank you, viewers, for watching. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit that like button and share it with your colleagues. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel by clicking that subscribe button below so you never miss out on valuable insights. I'm Brian Edmonds, signing off. See you in the next one.